Chapter 1. The Midnight Stranger. The little bell above the door of the last chapter bookstore jingled its final, soft note for the evening as Nina locked it securely from the inside. She let out a slow, tired breath, the long day of sorting new shipments and helping customers finally catching up with her. This bookstore was more than just a business to her. It was her sanctuary, a place filled with the comforting scent of old paper and fresh ink, a world of endless stories contained within four walls. She loved the quiet solitude that settled over the shop after hours, a peaceful silence broken only by the soft hum of the refrigerator in the back room where she kept her water and the occasional soda. She began her closing routine, moving through the familiar aisles of fantasy and romance, her fingers gently straightening a row of spines as she passed. The large window at the front of the shop showed the town of Cedar Brook settling into a deep, velvety darkness, the streetlights casting long, lonely shadows on the pavement. It was a quiet town, a safe town, and Nina's life within it was predictable and calm. It was this very quiet that made the sudden, sharp noise from the alleyway behind the shop so jarring. It wasn't the usual clatter of a trash can being knocked over by a raccoon. This was different, a low, menacing growl that was answered by a sharp, pained yelp. The sound was raw and violent, a disturbance in the peaceful fabric of the night. Nina's heart, which had been beating a slow, steady rhythm, suddenly kicked into a frantic gallop. Every sensible thought in her head told her to stay inside, to call the police, to lock the back door and wait for the noise to go away. But another part of her, a deeper, more instinctual part, recoiled at the sound of an animal in pain. Hesitantly, she moved toward the back of the store, peering through the small window in the door that led to the alley. The light from the single, flickering security bulb illuminated a scene that made her blood run cold. There were three of them, large, snarling dogs with matted fur and hungry eyes, circling something much larger lying on the ground. As her eyes adjusted, she saw it was a wolf, an enormous creature with fur the color of dark shadows. It was trying to stand to defend itself, but one of its back legs was bent at an awkward, painful-looking angle, and a deep gash on its shoulder wept blood onto the dirty asphalt. The wolf was magnificent, even in its suffering, its body radiating a powerful strength that was quickly being drained away. But what truly held Nina frozen was its eyes. As it lifted its head, its gaze met hers through the glass. They were a brilliant, intelligent green, and they held not just pain, but a fierce, proud defiance. In that moment, she didn't see a wild beast, she saw a noble creature fighting for its life. Without allowing herself another second to think, to be ruled by fear, Nina acted. She grabbed the heavy metal fire poker she kept near the back door for emergencies and yanked the door open. "Get out of here!" she yelled, her voice sharper and louder than she knew it could be. She swung the poker wildly, not to hit the dogs, but to create noise and movement, to startle them. The lead dog turned and snarled at her, but the distraction was enough. The wolf, seeing its chance, managed to lunge forward with a surge of desperate strength, causing the other two dogs to scatter backward. They hesitated for a moment, looking between the determined woman with a metal rod and the wounded but still dangerous wolf, before turning and fleeing down the alley into the darkness. The alley was suddenly, eerily quiet. The wolf slumped back to the ground, its chest heaving, its green eyes now fixed on her. The defiance was gone, replaced by exhaustion and a wary confusion. Nina stood her ground, her own breath coming in ragged pants, the fire poker still clutched in her trembling hand. She knew she should be terrified. She was alone in a dark alley with a massive, injured predator. But looking into those intelligent green eyes, she felt no fear, only a profound and urgent need to help. She slowly lowered the poker, letting it clatter to the ground, and held her empty hands up, showing she meant no harm. "It's okay," she murmured, her voice softening back to its normal tone. "They're gone. You're safe now." She took a slow, cautious step forward, then another. The wolf watched her, its ears twitching, but it didn't growl. It seemed to be studying her, just as she was studying it. When she was finally close enough to touch it, she knelt, ignoring the cold damp of the asphalt seeping through her jeans. The wound on its shoulder was deep and ugly. "I have a first aid kit inside," she whispered, more to herself than to the wolf. "I need to clean that." To her utter amazement, The wolf gave a soft, almost imperceptible chuff of air. It was as if it understood. Moving as slowly and deliberately as she could, she slipped her arms under its massive front quarters. It was incredibly heavy, all solid muscle and bone, but it seemed to understand her intent and made an effort to help, pushing with its 3 good legs as she half carried, half dragged it through the back door and into the storeroom of her bookstore. She settled it on an old, thick rug she used for reading nooks, and hurried to get her supplies. For the next hour, she worked by the dim light of the storeroom, cleaning the gash with antiseptic, applying a salve, and carefully wrapping it with a clean bandage. Throughout it all, the wolf lay perfectly still, its head on its paws, its luminous green eyes following her every movement. There was a deep, quiet understanding between them, a connection that bypassed words. When she was finished, she sat back on her heels, her task complete. The wolf slowly, carefully, pushed itself up. It stood on 3 legs, favoring the injured one, and took a limping step toward her. It lowered its great head and gently, so gently, nuzzled her hand with its cold, wet nose. Then, it gave her hand a soft, grateful lick. A jolt, warm and electric, shot up her arm and spread through her entire body. It was a feeling of rightness, of a connection so profound it made her heart ache. It was as if a missing piece of a puzzle she never knew she was trying to solve had just clicked into place. The wolf held her gaze for one long, last moment, its green eyes seeming to promise something, before it turned and limped out of the open back door, melting into the shadows of the night as silently as it had arrived. Nina stood in the middle of her storeroom for a long time, the scent of wolf and antiseptic lingering in the air. The world felt different, tilted on its axis. The quiet of her bookstore now felt empty, not peaceful. The predictable life she had built for herself suddenly seemed small and confined. She knew, with a certainty that settled deep into her bones, that the wolf with the green eyes was not gone from her life. Their story, whatever it was, had only just begun, and the quiet, ordinary world of Cedar Brook would never be enough for her again. Chapter 2. The Moonlit Bond. The familiar rhythms of Cedar Brook felt distant and hollow to Nina in the days that followed the encounter in the alley. The cheerful ring of the bell above her bookstore door, which usually brought her a small spark of joy, now felt like an intrusion. The quiet hours spent restocking shelves and reading in her favorite armchair were filled with a restless energy that had no outlet. Her mind was a constant reel of that night, the fierce intelligence in the wolf's green eyes, the solid weight of its body as she helped it inside, the shocking, electric warmth that had spread through her when it had nuzzled her hand. It was a feeling that had taken root deep within her, a persistent, humming awareness that her life was now divided into 2 distinct parts, before the wolf and after. She found her gaze constantly drifting toward the window, searching the faces of passers-by for a glimpse of something wild and untamed, her heart beating a little faster every time a tall, dark-haired man walked by. This strange new reality of waiting came to an end on the 4th evening. The shop was empty, the last customer having left with a new paperback tucked under their arm. Nina was lost in thought, absently running a dust cloth over the counter, when the bell above the door chimed, its sound unusually sharp in the quiet room. She looked up, and her breath caught in her throat. He stood just inside the doorway, a man so tall he seemed to fill the entire space. He was dressed in simple, dark clothes that spoke of practicality rather than fashion, and his hair was the same deep, shadowy black as the wolf's fur. But it was his eyes that held her captive, the same brilliant, piercing green that had haunted her dreams. They were fixed on her with an intensity that made the rest of the world seem to blur and fade away. For a long, suspended moment, they simply looked at each other. The humming energy in Nina's blood erupted into a roaring, undeniable force. The warm, tingly feeling from the alley returned, so powerful it made her legs feel unsteady. It was a feeling of homecoming, of a door she never knew was locked swinging open to reveal her true destiny. "My name is Marcus," he said, his voice a low, quiet rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards and settle deep in her chest. It was the same underlying power she had sensed in the wolf's presence, but now shaped into human words, layered with a gravity that was both commanding and gentle. "I came to thank you. Properly, this time." Nina's voice was a breathless whisper, the only word that mattered. The wolf. A single, slow, deliberate nod. Yes. She moved without conscious thought, her body operating on an instinct she was only just beginning to understand. She flipped the sign on the door to closed, and turned the lock, shutting out the world of Cedar Brook. She led him to the small reading nook at the back of the store, surrounded by shelves of poetry and classic novels. He didn't glance at the books. His entire focus remained on her, as if she were the most fascinating story ever written. He began to speak, and his words rebuilt her understanding of the world from the ground up. He told her of the Shadow Ridge Pack, a community of people who had lived in the high, secluded peaks beyond the town for generations. They were not monsters, he explained with a patient, solemn air, but guardians. The wolf was not a separate creature he became. It was another side of his very essence, as fundamental to him as his own heartbeat. He spoke of a sacred duty to protect the wild heart of the mountains, a balance that had been maintained for centuries. It was a truth that should have been unbelievable, yet hearing it from him, seeing the raw, unshakable honesty in his green eyes, it felt more real and more right than anything she had ever known. Then he told her about mates. His voice changed, dropping into a softer, more reverent tone, filled with an emotion so deep it made her own heart ache in sympathy. "For my kind," he said, leaning forward slightly, his gaze holding hers captive, "there is one person, one single soul the universe has crafted perfectly for you. It is a bond that goes deeper than friendship, stronger than any vow. It is a pull in your blood, a song that one heart sings and the other is born knowing." His eyes searched her face, seeming to see every secret hope, every lonely night she had ever spent surrounded by her books. "When you stood in that alley, fearless and full of compassion, I felt it. The bond snapped into place for me the moment your hands touched my fur. You are my mate, Nina." The word hung in the dusty, book-scented air, immense and profound. It was a word from the oldest of stories, yet it settled over her not as a fantasy, but as the simple, stunning truth she had been waiting for her entire life without knowing it. It was the only thing that could explain the magnetic pull, the deep-seated certainty, the feeling of finally being whole. He had given a name to the quiet emptiness she had carried, an emptiness that had now been utterly filled by his presence. A few days later, he asked her to come to his home. There was no fear, only a thrilling, breathless anticipation as she followed him up a path that was invisible to her until he pointed out the subtle signs, a specific notch in a tree, a cairn of stones almost hidden by ferns. They traveled deep into the mountains, the air growing cooler and rich with the scent of pine and cold stone, until they came to a hidden valley sheltered by towering cliffs. The village of the Shadow Ridge Pack was not built upon the land, but woven into it. Homes were nestled into the rock face, built amongst the towering trees, designed to be one with the wilderness. People moved with a fluid, natural grace, their laughter echoing warmly. They stopped and stared as Marcus led Nina through the center of the village. Their eyes, in various shades of hazel and gray, held a natural wariness. She was an outsider, a human. But when they looked at Marcus, at the unmistakable, protective way his large hand rested on the small of her back, their expressions softened into a quiet, respectful acceptance. Their alpha had found his mate. The following weeks were a blur of beautiful, life-altering discovery. Nina split her time between her bookstore and the mountains, her life becoming a dual existence that felt more complete than her single life ever had. In the Pax village, Marcus showed her his world. He showed her hidden waterfalls that cascaded into crystal-clear pools, and high meadows where the stars seemed close enough to touch. They walked for hours, and they talked even longer. He confessed the heavy weight of leading his people, the constant responsibility of keeping them safe and their secrets secure. She told him about her solitary life, her love for stories, her feeling of being different from everyone in Cedar Brook who lived their lives on the surface of things. With every shared secret, every quiet moment of understanding, the bond between them strengthened, becoming a tangible, living thing that wrapped around them both. It was in the way his hand would find hers as they walked, their fingers lacing together as if designed to fit. It was in the long, warm embraces where she could feel the steady, strong beat of his heart against her cheek, a rhythm that promised forever. It was in the soft, lingering kisses they shared under the blanket of stars, kisses that started out shy and exploring and grew in confidence and passion, each one a silent promise, a taste of a deep, abiding love they were both discovering. The air between them crackled with a pure, intense romance, a connection built on a foundation of utter trust and a soul-deep recognition that this was where they were always meant to be. One evening, they sat on a thick, soft fur spread before a small, crackling fire outside his home. The sounds of the pack settling in for the night, the soft murmur of voices, the distant, harmonious howl of a wolf on patrol, was a comforting melody. Nina leaned back against Marcus's chest, his strong arms wrapped around her, his chin resting gently on top of her head. She had never felt so safe, so completely and perfectly content, as if every piece of her life had finally clicked into place. He shifted slightly, turning her in his arms so he could look into her eyes. The firelight danced in his green gaze, which was filled with a love so profound it made her breath catch in her throat. "My soul," he whispered, his voice rough with a vulnerability she knew he showed no one else. "Recognized yours, Nina. I think it has been searching for you through every story ever told. And now that I've found you, the story is complete. I will never, ever let you go." He wasn't asking a question. He was stating a fact as undeniable as the ancient mountains surrounding them. It was a confession, a vow, and a declaration of a love that felt as eternal as the stars. Nina looked at him, at the man who was also a wolf, her protector, her other half, and she knew. She knew with every fiber of her being that her own soul had been searching for his, too. "I know," she whispered back, her voice thick with tears of pure, unadulterated joy. "My soul is yours, Marcus. It's finally, completely home." Chapter 3: The Threat and the Promise. The golden, sun-drenched days that followed were the most profoundly fulfilling of Nina's entire life. Her world had beautifully and irrevocably split into two harmonious halves, each one nourishing the other. By day, she remained the dedicated bookseller of Cedar Brook, her hands still skilled and gentle as she recommended stories and organized her beloved shelves. The townspeople noticed a new serenity in her demeanor, a quiet confidence that softened the edges of her former solitary intensity, but they attributed it simply to a satisfying summer. They could never have imagined the other magical half of her existence, the part that began each evening when she would follow the hidden paths deep into the mountains, her heart beating a rhythm of joyful anticipation that only quieted when she saw Marcus waiting for her at the edge of the clearing, his green eyes lighting up at the sight of her. In the Pax village, she was no longer just a visitor or a curious human. She was Marcus's, and the pack had gradually, warmly, woven her into the very fabric of their daily lives. She learned their customs, helped prepare meals in the large communal fire pit, and listened, enthralled, to their ancient stories spoken under the vast, star-strewn sky. Her connection with Marcus deepened into something unshakable and mature. It was in the easy, comfortable silences they shared, a language built on mutual understanding that needed no words. It was in the protective, possessive way his hand would rest on the curve of her waist, a constant, warm pressure that whispered she was his and he was hers. It was in the slow, deep kisses they exchanged in the quiet moments before dawn, kisses that spoke of a growing, passionate love and a commitment that was taking root, anchoring them together for all their tomorrows. The bond between them was no longer a strange, new sensation. It was the very bedrock of her existence, the steady, humming truth that gave purpose to her every breath. But the peace of the mountains was a delicate balance, easily disrupted. A subtle, creeping unease began to permeate the hidden valleys, a change felt not with the ears, but in the gut, a primal warning. The normal, bustling activity of the forest creatures grew hesitant, their movements furtive. Marcus became more watchful, his powerful frame often tense, his brilliant green gaze constantly scanning the deepest shadows between the trees. The relaxed man who held her through the night was now often locked in deep, hushed conversations with his most trusted warriors, their faces etched with lines of grim concern. The threat, when he finally explained it to her, was direct and dangerous. A specialized group of hunters had arrived in the region, armed with silver-tipped arrows and reinforced nets. They weren't after deer, they were trophy hunters who knew the legends of the Shadow Ridge Pack and sought to capture one of its members. A cold, Sharp dread coiled in Nina's stomach, colder than the deepest mountain stream. The sanctuary she had found was under a direct and violent threat. Her fear was a physical, piercing worry, not for herself, but for Marcus, for the pack, for the vulnerable pups who tumbled and played in the sun-dappled clearings. Marcus, as Alpha, devised a plan to lead the hunters on a wild chase through the most treacherous parts of the forest, far away from the vulnerable pack village and far away from Cedar Brook. It was a dangerous gambit, a deliberate dance with death meant to exhaust and dishearten their pursuers. The morning the warriors left, the village was blanketed in a heavy, anxious silence. Marcus stood before Nina, his hands cradling her face, his thumbs stroking her cheeks with a tenderness that belied the strength in his hands. His eyes were pools of fierce determination and unwavering love. "You must stay within the protected circle of the village," he said, his voice low and firm, a command laced with a desperate plea. "Do not venture into the deeper woods alone. These men are ruthless and they will not hesitate to use you against me. Promise me you will be safe." Nina could only nod, her throat too tight with unshed tears to form words. She pressed a small, smooth river stone she had found with him into his palm, a tangible piece of her love to carry with him. He closed his fingers around it, his expression softening for a fleeting, heart-breaking second before he leaned in and kissed her. It was a kiss filled with all the love and fear and desperate hope that swirled in the air around them. Then he was gone, shifting into his powerful wolf form and leading his warriors on their perilous quest, leaving behind a void of waiting that seemed to swallow all sound. The hours stretched, thin and torturous. Nina stayed with the elders and the mothers with young children, trying to help with the daily chores, but her mind was with Marcus, leading a deadly chase through the unforgiving wilderness. The not knowing was a special kind of agony. Driven by a need to feel closer to him, to perhaps catch a glimpse or a sound from a higher vantage point, she made a decision. She would not go far, just to the high ridge that overlooked the eastern pass. It was a terrible error in judgment. The hunters, clever and brutal, had split their group. While some were being led on Marcus's wild chase, others had been circling, looking for a weakness. And Nina, a human girl alone on the ridge, was the perfect target. A large, grim-faced man stepped out from behind a thick pine, his eyes gleaming with cruel triumph. "Well, what do we have here?" he grunted, his breath fogging in the cold air. "The wolf's little pet? You're going to make excellent bait." Before she could even scream, his hand clamped over her mouth, and another arm locked around her waist, lifting her off the ground. Pure, icy terror seized her. She struggled, but his grip was like iron. In her panic, she did the only thing she could. She screamed for Marcus not with her voice, but with her soul, throwing a desperate, silent cry down the bond that connected them, a raw signal of pure fear. "Marcus!" The response was instantaneous. A roar of pure, undiluted fury erupted from the forest below, a sound so primal it seemed to shake the very rocks under their feet. The hunter froze, his grip slackening for a crucial second. From the trees, a blur of dark fur and immense power launched itself up the ridge. It was Marcus, but Nina had never seen him like this. This was the alpha of the Shadow Ridge pack, a force of nature unleashed. Every muscle was coiled with lethal intent, his lips pulled back from gleaming fangs in a snarl that promised violence, his green eyes burning with a feral, protective rage. He moved faster than thought, a storm of teeth and fury directed solely at the man who threatened his mate. He didn't kill the hunter, but he disarmed him and disabled him with brutal, efficient force, sending him crashing to the ground with a cry of pain before turning his blazing gaze on the man, a clear, unspoken threat. The hunter, faced with this raw, unstoppable power, scrambled backward, then turned and fled down the mountain, his bravado completely shattered. The moment the man was gone, the great wolf turned. The fury in his eyes vanished, replaced by a desperate, shaking concern. He shifted back in a fluid motion, his only thought for her. He was at her side in an instant, his hands running over her arms, her face, checking for any harm. "You're safe. I've got you," he whispered, his voice hoarse, pulling her into a crushing embrace. She clung to him, her whole body trembling, burying her face in his chest, the solid, steady beat of his heart calming her own frantic one. He had felt her terror across the distance. He had come for her. In the quiet aftermath, as the pack ensured the hunters had truly retreated from their territory for good, the reality of the choice before her settled over Nina. She stood with Marcus on the high ridge where it had all almost ended, the one that now offered a view of both her past and her future. The wind played with strands of her hair, and the setting sun set the sky ablaze with color. He held both her hands in his touch gentle but his expression solemn and open, laying his heart bare before her. "You have a life in Cedar Brook," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "A good, peaceful life among your books. My life is here, bound to this land and this pack. It will always hold challenges, dangers that your human world does not. The choice of where you build your future, it must be yours, Nina. I will love you forever, no matter where you are." Nina looked out at the majestic, wild beauty of the mountains she had almost died to protect. She thought of her small, peaceful bookstore and her quiet apartment. Then she thought of the vibrant, loving community of the pack, the profound connection she felt to this land and its people, and the man standing before her. She saw her past, her present, and her entire future in his loving green eyes. She squeezed his hands, her own decision crystal clear, a truth she had known in her soul since the moment in the alley. "My heart is not defined by four walls and a roof, Marcus," she said, her voice clear and strong, filled with a love that would endure any storm. "It stopped being tied to a place the moment I found you wounded in the alley. My heart is your home. And I am yours, completely. I choose you. I choose this life. I choose us." The joy that illuminated his face was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. He pulled her into his arms, and their lips met in a kiss that was deeper and more profound than any they had shared before. It was a kiss of promise, of a future chosen and embraced, a seal on a bond that had been tested by adversity and forged in unwavering partnership and love. And as Nina stood there, wrapped in the arms of her wolf, her mate, her equal, high on the mountain they would protect together, she knew her greatest adventure was only just beginning. If you were captivated by Nina and Marcus's journey of fierce love and powerful partnership, there are countless more stories waiting to be discovered in the world of the Shadow Ridge Pack. To be the first to know when the next chapter of their lives unfolds, and to find yourself lost in other worlds where courage meets destiny and love conquers all, be sure to subscribe. Your next unforgettable adventure into romance and magic is just a click away.